All right, welcome everyone. My name is Lasse Leponiemi. I'm the Executive Director at HundrED, and I have a great pleasure to welcome you all to HundrED webinar with Andreas Schleicher. You are now seeing the schedule of this session on your screens, and together with me here is Pukrats, who is helping to do the technical facilitation of the session. And as Pukrats mentioned already a bit earlier, this is also live stream on the HundrED Facebook page at the moment. So if you are there and joining us, please be welcomed. Next, we are going to have a session facilitated by our founder, Saku Tuominen, and then a talk by Andreas Schleicher from OECD. And within these words, I would like to give the room to Saku. And if you want to tweet or if you want to tell others about this seminar, please use the hashtags and the social media channels mentioned on the bottom of the screen. So Saku, over to you.
So thank you, Lasse. Thank you, Pukrats. I try to be quite brief because this will be mostly about dialogue with Andreas, discussing about the challenges the whole education community is facing these days. After my short introduction to our spotlight, which was released this Friday, there's gonna be a speech by Andreas. Then I'm gonna be asking a couple of questions from him, and then there's gonna be a community Q&A, and this is gonna be a packed session. We try to close all of this or do all of this in 45 minutes. But briefly going towards the spotlight that we released on Friday, there is a link to our spotlight on the chat box, which you can download. The basic idea for the spotlight, Lasse, can you share your screen and put it on there? And so the basic idea of that one was, in relatively short time, we tried to identify some possible solutions that many people, whether teachers or parents or kids or other education stakeholders, could be using. We understand that the differences between countries, continents, schools are immense, and not all of them can be used. But we have a feeling is that overall they should be helping many people in many parts of the world. So please do download the report, and please do share that one. How the spotlight was divided was that we decided to concentrate on four areas in this one. Lasse, can you change the slide? The first one was that we know that there's a massive amount of different kind of toolkits already in the world, and we didn't want to duplicate the work. So we went through dozens of different spotlights and toolkits, and we selected 10 that we ourselves find useful. For example, Wide Open School, or the one made by UNESCO, and so on. So please go to the website or download the report and check the 10 toolkits we selected. We have a feeling is that all of them are extremely well made. Then the second area was high quality resources, and we didn't want to overlook any resources, because even if some of the resources are quite well known for education forerunners, people who are extremely active, we have a feeling that maybe 90% of teachers, parents, they don't know not even the best known resources. So we wanted to highlight those as well. Some examples of those is Khan Academy, for example, which has been extremely active during COVID-19, and they've been doing really good work in identifying resources that can easily be used. Another example is, for example, HundrED, that has been collecting great resources, great videos for anybody that can be quite easily used by parents or teachers and so on. And there's 8 other examples on this category. We also identified scalable innovations, and the basic philosophy behind this category was trying to identify innovations that can be quite easily implemented in many countries. And having said that, we understand is that it might be, and it is challenging in many parts of the world because of the restrictions, because of the lack of connection and so on. And we will be discussing about this one later on. But one example of this one, for example, is a Scratch, which is extremely well-made tool where anybody can be teaching coding and so on. It's easy to use in any families and so on, extremely well-made, highly recommended. Another example could be, for example, Keynote, which is concentrating on physical exercise. We have a feeling that one of the key topics during this time is well-being, whether physical or mental. And we try to select tools that are highlighting well-being, and Keynote is one good example. There's others, but we wanted to highlight that. And then the last category are ideas which are not simple to implement as such, but that should be giving inspiration to many countries. And we have, I think, 7 categories on this area. And one example in here is using broadcasting technology in trying to reach every parent, every family quite fast. There's been a lot of innovation happening on this area in China, in Ukraine, in Mexico, and so on, but also in countries like Pakistan, where they be using radio as delivering information to families and as well. And then another example in here is virtual communities. We have feelings that there hasn't been massive amount of cooperation between governments in this crisis, but there's a lot of grassroots cooperation happening across countries. And if this crisis is leading into more active cooperation between teachers, schools across borders, I think that that's one good positive outcome that could be coming out of this one. But mentioning briefly HundrED's approach in this one, we have a feeling is that innovations as they are, even if they are great ones, they are not enough to make the change happen. So what is our approach is that first there has to be an educator's need. And I think that in times like this, the need is quite obvious. We need to be delivering high quality education, which is based on the excellence and equity, which can be implemented in different kind of families, in different kind of communities. We have a feeling is that there is no lack of good solutions out there, but the key problem is in between, meaning how do you implement these? How do you implement these at scale? How do you implement them so that kids are learning and they understand? And we have a feeling is that there is a massive need for co-development, co-implementation, funding, and so on, so that we can really make the change happen in a fast time span. And this is something that Andreas will be speaking and will be discussing about, meaning how do you make the change happen? And the reason for this problem is obvious. We decided to do an opinion poll with our community and asking how do they see the key challenges at the moment. And for example, 80% of our community coming from more than 30 countries is that almost 90% of the people, they were concerned that this pandemic will increase inequality in education. 94% they thought that their education system was not extremely well prepared for something like this happen. And we are not blaming, this is kind of like the feeling that people are saying. And then the last one is that less than 20% of the people believe that countries and the leaders of the countries are actively cooperating with each other and so on. So we have a feeling is that these are some examples of the challenges we are facing in all parts of the world, and so on. But please do download the report, and please do share it, and so forth. But now we are moving. We made this report together with OECD. We are extremely grateful for all the backing Andreas has been giving, all the discussions, all the activity, and so on. It's been so great to notice that OECD has been so agile in crises like this and so on. So with these words, Andreas, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Sakyu. And first of all, I want to congratulate you and your team, and actually not just for the toolkit, but most importantly for your fantastic leadership in curating digital learning resources. And also, you've always contributed the results of your work as a global public good, and I think that's so important in this time. in a way, when the rest of us were sleeping, you worked for many years, not just to identify and sort of innovative digital resources, but always to curate them, to make them accessible in structured, organized ways. And I think this is, the toolkit is just an example of this. As you say, there's an abundance of work out there. What often is lacking is the interface to help teachers find their way through this. And this is exactly where I think your toolkit aims at. No? Sort of overnight, as schools around the world are shutting down in the COVID crisis in now more than 150 countries, your work on online learning has really elevated from a nice to have to almost a lifeline for education. But COVID also strikes us at a point when education isn't really prepared for online learning yet. Now, according to PISA, a little more than 2/3 of 15-year-old students in the OECD countries are in schools where digital devices have sufficient computing capacity. And even in a technologically advanced country like Japan, you have just 40% of students in schools with adequate software for learning. At least that's what their teachers and school leaders say. And on average, across OECD countries, just about half of 15-year-olds are in schools with an effective online learning platform connecting teachers and learners. Because learning is not a transactional phenomenon, it's a relational phenomenon. This contact between learner and educator is so crucially important, but we do lack that kind of infrastructure. And then you have, 1 in 10 students who don't even have a place to study at home, not to speak of a computer. So there's a lot of really hard work to do. And I think that's really where this work is front and center. In some way, the state of technology and education mirrors the state of mind of our school systems. Our school systems were typically invented in the industrial age, when the prevailing norms were standardization, compliance, when it was both effective and efficient to educate students in batches and to train teachers once for their working lives. And you had curricula that spell out what students should learn, and they trickled down, through the pyramid, instructional material, teacher education, learning environments, often through many layers of government, until they reach teachers and learners in their classroom. And this structure that we inherited from the industrial approach to work makes change in a fast-moving world that is vulnerable and to disruptions, crises like this, far too slow. In some way, the changes that we are seeing in our societies have vastly outpaced the structural capacity of our current education systems to respond, even to absorb the great technologies that you find us out there. Even the best education minister can no longer, solve the problems of, millions of students or 100,000s of schools or 10,000s of, institutions. Now, at this moment of crisis, implementation is really to build on the expertise and the knowledge of teachers and school leaders, and to enlist people at the front line in the design of superior policy and practice. And that's the hardest challenge that is today, moving from this kind of top-down systems to capitalizing on the ideas and energy at the front line. Systems that are good at this, are using innovation at scale in this very crisis. They're very agile. Systems that are bad at this have just a very, very hard time. We need innovators who challenge the kind of institutional structures that are often built around the interests and habits of administrators, educators, rather than the interests of learners. The innovators who are really sincere about social change, who are very imaginative about policymaking, and who are capable of using the trust that people invest in them. And that's not just accomplished by letting 1,000 flowers bloom. Exactly, you've pointed that out. What we really need is a carefully crafted, enabling environment that unleashes the ideas of teachers and schools, and that builds capacity for change. That's sort of the scarcest resource probably that we have today, beyond technology. And perhaps the biggest issue is really the very fragmented approach to online learning that you just highlighted. It's almost impossible for teachers to find their way through what is available. We don't have systems. We have a very atomistic culture of technology deployment in schools. We ask, teachers and schools to invent their own medicine, and that's very hard to do. And in a way, that's exactly where your work is going, Saku. And I think your work can really inspire students to not just learn better, but to learn differently, and teachers not just to teach better, but teach differently. But we need to use the momentum. Real change often takes place in deep crisis. And this moment also holds the possibility that we don't just return to the status quo when things get back to normal. And when this crisis has deeply disruptive implications for education, it will not have predetermined implications. It's, the nature of our collective and systemic responses to this crisis that will determine how we're all going to be affected by this crisis, in education included. And what I'd also like to highlight is that the opportunities that technology offers go well beyond, a stopgap solution in this crisis. Technology and your work, Saku, around the innovation frontier allows us to find totally new answers to what people learn, how people learn, when people learn, where people learn. Technology can enable teachers and students to access specialized material well beyond textbooks in different formats, in ways that bridge time, that bridge space. And together with great teachers, intelligent digital learning system cannot just teach you science. They can also, simultaneously observe how you study science, and then learn from this and adapt the kind of things and tasks that you'll be getting. Understand sort of this kind of interactivity using artificial intelligence is something which holds a lot of potential to increase equity in learning opportunities. At this moment, obviously, we're all concerned that technology is going to amplify disparities that we already see. And that's true. That is one of the biggest concerns that we should be having. But in the long run, technology will better understand how different people learn differently and engage with that diversity. So very differentiated instructional systems. We need to just capitalize on this. But I also think we need to think beyond the how of education and devote more attention to the what. What is it that young people really need to learn in this kind of technology-driven age? Now, the challenges that are in front of us go well beyond issues around school closures. We live in a world in which the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test have also become easy to digitize, to automate. The industrial age taught us to educate second-class robots, people who are very good in repeating what we tell them. In this age of accelerations, we need to think much harder about what makes us first-class humans, how we complement, not substitute, the artificial intelligence that we created in our computers, and how we build a culture that facilitates learning, that it facilitates unlearning, relearning when the context changes. Think about tomorrow's learning environments. You prepare people to think for themselves, work with others, with empathy, and work in citizenship, to develop a good sense of sensitivity to the claims that others make on us, a grasp on the limits of individual and collective action. Whether it's at your home, a community, we need a deep understanding how other people live in different cultures and traditions, and how other people think, whether it's scientists or activists. And that's, again, you, Saku, have helped people look up, not just upward in the education, but outward to the next, school, to the next, teacher, the next culture, the next system. I think that is so important in the time we live. But building those capabilities will also necessitate different forms of learning. Technology is not just, teaching us something, but it can also build great community learning, more social, more fun. Some of the applications in your toolkit are a fantastic example of this. Technology can also build communities of teachers to share and enrich teaching resources and practices, and to collaborate on professional growth. Now, what more? I mean, that's the most important thing, is giving teachers the tool to connect, to collaborate, to exercise professional autonomy in a collaborative culture. Imagine a giant crowdsourcing platform where teachers, researchers, policy experts from all over the world collaborate to curate the most relevant and pedagogical practice. maybe Saku, this is where you will get from 100 to 1,000. And the recipe is always about unlocking the creativity of educators. The desire of people to contribute, to collaborate, to be recognized for their contributions. One of the things this crisis highlights is how many people are willing to devote their ideas, their to make a difference. We need a framework. This is really how technology can extend the reach of great teaching, that recognizing that value is less and less created vertically, and increasingly horizontally by whom we connect and work with now. So thank you again, Saku.
Thank you, Andreas, not only for your kind words, but also for your inspiring work and cooperation as well. Andreas, together with Harvard, they released a great report yesterday, and you can find the link for that one as well, which is full of insights. I'm asking just a few questions, and then we are opening it up to the community. Briefly, I know that the question is extremely difficult and there are no easy answers, but I have a feeling is that everyone knows that the need we have, the whole education community has, is obvious. And there's a lot of great solutions out there. But how do you make the implementation happen fast and at scale? In many other areas of the society, there are restrictions and it's extremely top-down. Governments are telling what to do and so on. Do you think that in education in a time like this, we should be more top-down? We should be kind of like giving more clear rules on how to operate, or what is the other possibility on making change happen in a fast time span?
Well, in the immediate, good regulatory frameworks will help you. If governments contribute to, the setting standards and curating digital resources, life of teachers are going to be, teachers are going to be helped by this. But in the long run, or even in the sort of intermediate space, it's about, connecting educators. It's about building spaces where we rely on the expertise that is at the front line. That's something, the dormant potential of our education systems. There are a lot of really great teachers out there who are very innovative, very creative. I don't think any government can replicate that level of creativity. What governments can do is to create more shared spaces for teachers to collaborate, to contribute to, and that's really what professionalization is about. On the one hand, yes, providing some guidance on curation and maybe platforms for knowledge co-creation. But at the end of the day, it's really about unleashing the potential that lies in schools. Become better as a government to share expertise across the boundaries of schools. Our education systems are still very atomistic. Teachers work in isolation in the classroom. Schools work in isolation. If you're a tech company, a tech innovator, you have to have an army of salespeople to get to schools. Now, this is a problem that governments can solve, in my view, very, very quickly. And you can see the countries that have solved those kinds of issues are much better to respond to this crisis now.
We live in a world that is extremely global, and this COVID has shown it more than anything, is that our challenges are global. At the same time, a lot of education is extremely local. So how do you see global solutions working? Obviously, we have to take the context into consideration, but how do you see, is it too optimistic to think that there are global solutions that can be used in many locations?
Well, I think actually the two belong together, to have global connectedness where we actually share common goods and resources, and at the same time, the capacity at the frontline learning is a very personal and individual process. It's not even about teaching one class in the same way. It's about, understanding how different people learn differently. So it's always going to be an individual, a local phenomenon, a relational phenomenon, but it can be supported by global educational resources, and some of this has already happened. You mentioned, Khan Academy, that's become a global public good. I do think, we don't need to reinvent mathematics teaching. I think maybe, when it comes to history and culture, there's a lot of specificity required. But I do think in many fields of learning, we can globally collaborate, and people in other disciplines take this for granted. My background is physics, or go to people in science. People share a common language. They solve local problems, but they still have a common understanding of the discipline. And I think we need to work on that in education.
Have you seen, because you've been following what is happening in all continents, have you seen some systems or countries that have been reacting to this crisis extremely well?
Well, you have some systems that have been better prepared for this. I mean, the most obvious example is China, putting 50 million learners online within a month. But the reason why they could do this is because they had teachers at the front line who were willing to play, who actually have been used to be not only instructors, but also researchers, co-developers. There's a lot of innovation happening in the country, very locally at the front line. So teachers were used to this. Suddenly they were given the opportunity, connected, you capitalize on this. And I think this tells us, actually, I think your country, Finland, is also well positioned because, again, teachers will not just see themselves as, delivering prefabricated lessons, but they see themselves as co-creators of innovative learning environments. So in a different space, in a different context, those people, I think, will move very, very rapidly. What I can say in most education systems, those examples are very local. It's actually very hard. You can find very few countries where you can talk about a systemic approach to innovation. I think that's really what this crisis teaches us. Very few countries have been capable to leverage, the talent of teachers at scale in a system.
The last question before we open this one. It's obvious that there are countries, continents where roughly 2 to 3 billion people are without internet connection. They are lacking tools and so on. What is your message to these countries? Because if the situation is complicated in global north, it's so much more complicated in global south.
Yeah, I think the perfect can sometimes be the enemy of the good. There are good resources that do not require broadband access. Television is a very simple answer that can actually be very effective. And there are some good approaches to this, and actually in South America or in Central America. So I think we should just be more creative in the solutions. Yes, if I require, complex broadband access, I'm going to exclude a lot of people. But if I'm more open to just look at different forms of digital technology, I can reach a lot more people. But I don't think actually, even in those countries, the primary bottleneck is technology. The much harder challenges is, young people who have always been spoon-fed in their classes, were used to sort of get learning bit by bit from their teacher. Suddenly, to have the motivation, the capacity, the learning strategy to actually learn on your own. If school has been a misery for you, why would you do this voluntarily at home? I think that's the biggest struggle that we have, and we're excluding a lot more young people through that than by access of technology. So I think that's something that that's why it's so important to develop learning resources that really speak to young people. And that gives them a sense of ownership, a sense of, I can actually, set my own learning goals, persevere, monitor. And that's again where the role of teachers who are not just good instructors, but also good coaches, good mentors, good facilitators, good evaluators is becoming so crucial.
Fantastic. With these words, I'll give it now to Lasse and Books. And please, for the community, please do ask questions in the chat box. We try to get as many as possible within the following 10 minutes and so on. But Lasse and Books, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the discussion, Andreas and Saku. And we have been going through the Q&A section and the chat box, and we have selected some people to ask their questions. And first, I have a great pleasure to allow Professor Pasi Sahlberg from Sydney to ask a question. Pasi, I believe you can now unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm speaking to you from Sydney, Australia. And just like Andreas said, I would also like to congratulate HundrED for wonderful work, and also Andreas for the introduction. It's really great. My question to Andreas is the following: that if the poll that HundrED showed in the beginning is correct, that show that only 1 in 6 respondents in a poll think that their own education system leaders, the governments, are actively learning from from others how to respond to this ongoing and evolving crisis. Andreas, now based on your experience and knowing that the collaboration between systems is very important for you, how do you think we could make the collaborative improvement and development of and responding to this crisis, developing education work in the best possible ways in this system, knowing also what you said earlier, that there are some examples that would be worth looking at closely, but how to make it happen in an international or global scale?
Yeah, I think, Pasi, that you raise a very important point. I think in education, we have a habit of constructing walls around us. You know, that's happening in classrooms where teachers work in isolation. Schools are not often, you know, embedded in a collaborative structure. And the same is true in our education systems. And some of the reason is that we lack safe spaces to actually collaborate. You know, everything is very exposed in school and in education. And I do think part of the answer lies, you know, to lower the risks for people to do engage in collaborative innovation across, you know, within the system and across the system. And in a way, you know, if you tell a teacher, well, you know, at the end of the day, I'm going to evaluate it by this standard, then you will discourage people to become collaborative. And I think we see the same phenomenon at the international level. Most spaces are very public. And I think what we really need to do is to create a process that engages people more, that is also built around better evidence. A lot of the walls that we create around us are walls of ideology, of beliefs, of ideas. And actually, once you scratch that surface with evidence, you get people to talk about their different systems and to look at their own systems through the lens of another education system. I think that's really something that I think is starting to happen, but at a speed that is much too slow, really.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pasi and Andreas. The next question is by Rachel Hines. She is the National Program Director of High Resolves from Australia. So I think, Rachel, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, Andreas. I really wanted to ask you, I'm in Brisbane, Australia, and I think what we're seeing here is teachers with very low capacity to move to online learning, and the immediate response is to sort of hunker down and really only look at core curriculum. Whereas we see, you know, COVID is one of the biggest learning opportunities, we think, for young people in terms of citizenship, collective action, and collaboration, and understanding that they are not passive in this, but they have an active role. How can we inspire teachers whose cognitive load is so high at the moment to be innovative and really look outside of, you know, just that core curriculum aspect and really speak to what young people, I think, need at this point in terms of understanding their role and what's happening in the world?
You know, it's a very interesting point. You know, when we, with Harvard, we did our survey and we surveyed educators, school leaders, and, you know, policymakers. Virtually everyone said at this moment of crisis, social and emotional skills are at least as important as cognitive development. Student well-being, teacher well-being are at the center of the attention. That's the one message that we give to teachers. But the other message we give to them is, well, you know, at the end of the day, you've lost a lot of time and you can only reach, you know, 20% of the curriculum in this moment. So focus on the things that students need in their grades, in their exams. And so the teachers are navigating between those two spaces. And there is a tension. And I think getting teachers a more coherent message of what is really important in this crisis. Most teachers, actually, when you survey teachers, we have good data on this, they want to make a difference to the lives of students. They don't want to just teach science and math. They want to actually engage with students from disadvantage. Teachers are, you know, that's their natural motivation, the inclination to become a teacher. I think in this moment, we need to give them the kind of autonomy, professional autonomy to do this and to do what they know is right in this moment. But they operate under different pressures. Some of those pressures may come from parents as well, who say, well, you know, you've got only less time, so focus on the things that my child will need to get, you know, to an elite university. So I think those tensions are real, and I think that's a role for public policy to find actually good guidance and answers for school leaders and teachers.
Thank you for the answer. And then the third question is coming from Shenzhen and London. I believe now Edison is in London, but let's unmute Edison. I believe you are now able to ask you a question.
Hi there, thanks Lassie, and thanks HundrED for hosting this very timely webinar. Thank you, Andreas, for speaking with us today. My question is, with so many online resources out there, how should educators and schools decide what and where the best resources are? So you spoke about curation and the work that organizations like HundrED are doing, but what criteria is there for a good online education as opposed to a good education in general?
Well, you know, actually, Saku will be better positioned to answer that question, because that is what his life is really about, to find ways to actually help people digest this vast amount of good ideas and to connect the needs of educators with what are the most innovative ideas out there. I don't think you can put that on the shoulders of teachers at the front line alone. I think it's like, you know, if you would go to a pharmacy and say, well, you know, pick your own drug, you know, people need some kind of structure in this. So I think HundrED is a great place to actually make that conversation happen. I do also think over time, that's not something we can do in this crisis, but we need stronger regulatory environments that, you know, set clearer standards of what good practice really look like. And they should come from the profession themselves. You know, hopefully, you know, this idea of curating work through the teaching profession will take hold. It does already in some countries. So I think that's also important. But in the immediate, you know, I think it's the people who help navigate who are going to be of central importance. But, you know, I leave that for Saku to really answer.
Thank you.
Saku, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, what is our belief in HundrED is that all the key decisions about the direction where we want to be heading, where each and every country or community or school wants to be heading, that should be a local discussion and local decision, so that the teachers and the community decides that this is where we want to go. And then our goal is to be identifying some of the tools that could possibly take them there. But it should be a local decision. We are not the ones who are deciding what are the tools that should be used in Brisbane or in Costa Rica and so on, because it should be based on the local values and local community and so on. But this is a really long discussion, which I would love to have in another occasion. Lasse, do you have something else? Or?
Yes, so this has been a little crazy because we have 36 questions plus a bunch on the chat, and we have 5 more minutes. So we'll try to take a few. We have a question by Luciana, who is from Finland but currently working in Brazil. So Luciana, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Luciana Pelönen. I'm the head of design service for Escolas Concept in Brazil. Originally from Brazil, but then became Finnish, and now I'm here. So Andreas, I'm very happy with the opportunity to be listening to you, being very inspirational. And one thing that I was wondering here is regarding the framework to wrap the response. What would be the most basic criteria for a school to tackle on educators' professional development and also on family engagement? Because as you said, learners, they cannot learn alone if they don't have strategies and regarding motivation. So do you have any basic criteria that schools should be taking upon when they are thinking about educators and family? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think your question goes really beyond the crisis, when actually learning takes place in school. And absolutely, we see from our Thales survey how important learning environment for teachers is. Now, your students are not becoming lifelong learners if they don't see your teachers working as lifelong learners themselves. And I think a crisis like this illustrates, you know, you cannot possibly prepare yourself for this in your initial teacher training. You need to become a kind of lifelong, life-wide learner as a teacher, and to facilitate and support that is a very, very important task for leadership in school, leadership in the system, not to build the kind of structures that help teachers learn from and with each other, to, you know, curate pedagogical practice and, you know, be open to new ideas and innovation. What our data actually show is that there is a great willingness among teachers to engage in new ideas. About 80% of teachers across the OECD think that their colleagues are open for innovation. But then you survey school leaders, and only about 40% of school leaders say, I actively encourage my teachers actually to engage with new ideas and new pedagogical practice. So I think there's more to be done at the system level to create room for people. It's not about sending people to training courses. I don't think that is the answer. The answer is really about changing the work organization in schools so that school becomes a place of learning for everybody, for, of course, the students, but also for teachers, for school leaders, for parents.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Then we will have time for one more question from Rob Huben from Agora School. So Rob, I will allow you to talk now, so please ask your question.
Yes, now I'm connected, I guess. Well, thank you, Lasse. I would love to ask Andre the following question. I see that a lot of schools in my environment in the Netherlands are focusing on technology now. So they came from like the 19th century and making a big sprint in the last couple of weeks. And I think this is great for the development of education in the long term, but is this what we need in this crisis? Because I believe that what kids really need at the moment is personal attention and connection with other children and talking to mentors and teachers. And what I see, what I kind of feel is that we are going too far into that education and forget this attention for the student. Is it something I am seeing, or is this a general thing? And how could we as educators start facilitating this?
I think you raise a very central part, and in this moment, you're absolutely right. What is most needed is the care aspect of teachers, the relational aspect. Do I understand? Do I understand who my students are, what they need in this moment? How can I engage with them? So technology that bridges space, communication, collaboration technology is really at the premium now. And the more advanced digital learning resources are probably something more for the medium and longer term. They are also very important tools because they can actually make learning a more kind of universal experience, where it's not just happening, in school, but also, connecting learners in different ways, giving learners access to sort of different forms of teaching. I think in the special needs area, I think technology is going to play a very, very important role. But as you say, in this moment, the most important challenge is to keep the social fabric of schools alive, to connect educators with families, to support students, to ensure that students don't get lost. I think if we lose that social fabric of schools in this crisis, it's going to be very, very hard to rebuild, because it's a matter of, that is, the foundation of the trust that, students have in schools, that parents have in schools, that teachers have in students. So absolutely, I think we should, deploy technology at this moment first and foremost to build and rebuild that social fabric, and then think about, the cognitive, social, emotional development in the medium term.
Thank you for the answer, and I believe that this has been so delightful discussion to have all the different viewpoints and having this possibility to open the discussion also for our community a little bit. And I believe that we could go on for hours if we would have all the time available. At this point, I would like to give the Zoom room to Saku to tell us about the next steps, what we can do after this webinar. Thank you, Rob, for your question as well.
Thank you, Lasse. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Andreas. Everyone who have been present here. I think that this whole crisis shows, going back to Rob's question, is that there's a lot of potential in online learning, but it's not enough. We need to have face-to-face, we need to have presence and so on. So I think that it's also showing the value in what is happening in traditional classrooms and so forth. I'm asking one favor from Andreas, because there's so many great questions If you have time, we could be selecting maybe 10 of those and create a Google Doc and answer to some of those. Maybe even Pasi or someone can join, and then we can be sending back our written answers to those questions within couple of days, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Great pleasure.
Thank you so much. And Lasse, if you can put the slide about the next steps in here. So the next steps is that, first of all, please do share the report, use it mindfully. We don't believe, not even for a second, that those are the innovations which will solve everything, but they might be helpful for many people in this crisis. Also, this is not a static report. We want to keep it dynamic so that we are looking for new ideas. So the community, if you find something that is working on your area, on the government level, on a school level, on a parent level, please do send us the ideas, and we are more than happy to promote them globally. We are trying to build people like you who are sharing the message and so on. So please do invite ambassadors to HundrED, if possible. We are sharing the links in the chat room as well. And we didn't touch too much on rural areas and the most unfortunate areas in the world. And that's why we are having a special workshop and an online webinar on that one coming on next Thursday, in which you are extremely welcome to join as well. And with these words, I'd love you also to stay home and safe, and try to keep an optimistic, positive mindset, because it is difficult, but it's also a great learning experience for us all. So with these words, please share the word, please continue the good work, and I would love to thank all of you for joining us, and especially I would love to thank Andreas and OECD for joining us and doing great work. So with these words, thank you, and you will be getting a document from us with more questions and answers within a couple of days. Thank you so much.